The single market was completed by the 1992 deadline set down in the Single European Act. Also, in 1993, the Maastricht Treaty was signed, officially creating the European Union, which is why the treaty is also known as the Treaty on European Union. It set a deadline for completing the Economic Monetary Union, which would mean a single currency for the EU. In addition to the powers of the European Community already held, the treaty gave the EU new powers. The area of justice and home affairs deals with issues like immigration, visa, asylum, and police cooperation to follow crime across borders. The treaty also introduced the common foreign and security policy, so Europe could unite in world politics. As you can see, this created the three-pillar system in the EU. The two pillars representing the EU's new powers had different rules for making law. This is because member states are protective of their powers over issues like immigration, security, and foreign policy. The different rules restricted the EU's power to make decisions in these pillars, protecting member states' powers or national sovereignty. In this situation, the EU controls some policies, while others must be negotiated by national governments. When the EU has more power, it is called supranationalism, and when national governments have more power, it is known as intergovernmentalism.
The Schengen Treaty, initiated in 1995, was an important step for the freedom of movement. It abolished controls at internal borders and created a single strengthened external border. The UK and Ireland chose not to join in this agreement, and Denmark does not fully participate. Although they are not members of the EU, the agreement does include Norway and Iceland. On January 1, 2002, Euro banknotes and coins were available to the public, thanks to the completion of the Economic and Monetary Union. The euro replaced all the old currencies in the Eurozone, which includes all countries that use the euro. In 2008, there were 15 members, and the newer member states are working to join as well. The United Kingdom decided not to join. The financial policy for the Eurozone is set by the European Central Bank based in Frankfurt. Its main task is to fight inflation. In the spirit of creating a more democratic and transparent EU, the drafting of the constitutional treaty would involve the public more than any of the previous EU treaties. Representatives from the European Parliament, the Commission, member state governments and parliaments, as well as from future member states in Central and Eastern Europe, worked together on drafting a constitution for Europe. Although there was little interest from the media, all the deliberations and documents were open to the public. After 16 months of work, the Convention completed the draft treaty establishing a constitution for Europe in the summer of 2003. The final document, the treaty establishing a constitution for Europe, was finished in 2004. So what would the Constitution do? It would simplify how the EU works by getting rid of the three-pillar structure and putting all policies under one procedure. There would be just one procedure for making decisions on all policies. It would also create a more democratic decision-making process by granting more power to the European Parliament.
It would establish European values and rights by formally including the Charter of Fundamental Rights as a legally binding document. The Charter would formalize the values of the EU as rights to dignity, freedoms, equality, solidarity, citizens' rights, and justice. European courts would have to refer to these formal values when making decisions. It would also officially establish the symbols of the European Union: the flag, an anthem, Beethoven's Ode to Joy, the Euro, Europe Day, May 9th, as a holiday through the EU, and an official motto, Unity in Diversity. Finally, it would give the EU a stronger voice in global politics. It would establish a permanent presidency of the European Council and would create an EU Minister of Foreign Affairs. However, the Constitution still had to be ratified by all the member states. Member states can choose to ratify treaties in their parliaments or by popular referendums in which citizens vote. Many member states chose to ratify the Constitution by referendum, and in 2005, citizens in France and the Netherlands voted against the Constitution. This prompted a political crisis. The future of the EU would need reconsideration. What would be the next step? Is the EU too out of touch with the citizens? What do Europeans want the EU to be? Was the Constitution going too far in putting the EU above national sovereignty? These questions would need to be answered for the EU to keep moving forward.
To answer these questions, European leaders called for a period of reconsideration to decide on the next step. The Constitution was controversial because it was very symbolic. With a constitution, flag, anthem, and an established presidency, the EU would look too much like a real state. People were worried that the EU was becoming a superstate that would replace national governments and identities. On the other hand, the EU leaders were convinced that the institutional changes of the Constitution were necessary, especially since the EU had almost doubled its membership in recent years. They finally decided to sign a new treaty. This new treaty was very similar to the constitutional treaty but tried to avoid controversy. First of all, there was no reference to a constitution. The treaty was named the Lisbon Treaty after the city in Portugal where it was signed. It also left out the official symbols of the EU. On the other hand, it kept the new president and foreign minister and the Charter of Fundamental Rights. Of course, the Lisbon Treaty would also undergo the ratification process. This time, almost all of the member states would ratify the treaty in their parliaments instead of by referendum. Because it was required by their national constitution, Ireland was the only member state to put the treaty to referendum. In June of 2008, Irish citizens voted no, rejecting the Lisbon Treaty, making the EU's future uncertain.